He paused for a while before glancing at the two people, who were still dumbstruck. Then don't let them step into this house again. Harold rocked back on his heels in shock and Lily immediately shivered. Jason's words were undoubtedly telling these two that if they left without finding the ring, it would mean severing all ties with the Reed family. Seeing that Jason had left, Harold and Lily looked at each other in dismay. Although the pool in front of them was not too deep, it was still about 100 square meters. Even worse, the bottom of the pool was covered with mud and algae, so it would not be easy to find a small ring. Lily was about to cry. Dad, what should I do? Do I really have to go down and look for the ring? Can't we call someone or try and reason with Jason? This is ridiculous. The man doesn't give a shit about your excuses, Lily. Whatever trouble you've caused, you have to solve it yourself. If the Reed group really breaks ties with our family, you no doubt know what will happen to us in the future. Since it was related to the future of his family, even though it was his daughter, Harold could not tolerate any resistance. Lily was silent. Of course, she knew that many of the big businesses in her family's holdings relied on the Reed group. If Jason turned hostile, it would be a devastating blow to her family. Lily felt helpless and could only walk into the pool step by step. It was so cold and the water smelled like a swamp. She began to look for the small ring, bending down and feeling along the bottom. She winced and screamed several times. When she scraped against rocks and God knew what if there were turtles? She could lose a finger. She had not expected Jason to take revenge for Grace. And now that he had, she wondered what else he might do to her. Next, when Jason returned to the apartment, he saw Grace washing clothes. Her hands were soaked in ice-cold water and they had already turned red from the cold. Why don't you use hot water? He asked with a frown. Hot water needs to be boiled, which will use a lot of electricity. Besides, if you wash with cold water for a while, your hands will start to heat up, Grace said. She soaked the clothes again and wrung them out to dry. He took her hands in his. They were so cold. Next time, use hot water when you wash clothes. Just use the electricity, and I will earn the money, he said. She could not help laughing. She raised her hand and patted his shoulder. It's all right. I should save money whenever I can. There'll be many places to spend money in the future. How was dinner with your colleagues tonight? Was it enjoyable? 4. Not bad, Jason replied. Dinner with his colleagues had been his excuse tonight. If he had guessed correctly, then Lily would still be looking for the ring in the Reed family's pond. He wondered how long Lily would spend. It seems to have grown a little longer, Grace muttered, bringing Jason back to reality. He saw the person before him raising her hand to gently press his hair back. Jay, why don't I trim your hair for you? When it's long like this, it's got to be annoying, getting in your face and whatnot. He laughed. His hair was tied back during the day, and he only left it down around her and while in her environment so people wouldn't recognize him. She ran her hands through his hair again. I think it will look so good, she said as if already envisioning it. He stared at her with a bright glint in his eyes. Moments later, he slowly said, all right. Grace only had simple tools, a comb and a pair of scissors. Then, she took a piece of cloth and wrapped it around Jason's neck. She combed his bangs gently with a comb, then began to trim the hairs on his forehead bit by bit. All of her attention was concentrated on the task at hand. Jason watched her, the way she studied him, so focused on her task. That singular focus had served her well in her life, first with her education and graduating top of her class at university and later at law school, and then in surviving prison. Guilt stabbed at him. He saw how she'd been abused in the time that he knew her. What must her life be like behind bars, with no one to champion or protect her, and countless criminals coming after her, all in the hopes of pleasing him. She sucked in a breath and he hung on to that little sound. Her mouth was pretty, full lips, a bright smile. She didn't smile enough, he realized. Her skin was still red, likely from the wind and cold, and though it pinkened her cheeks and nose, it only enhanced her beauty. If he looked hard enough, he could see that she'd been beautiful once. Her features carried symmetry and character. But it wasn't the outward appearance that drew him, but rather what came from within. This woman, she'd been the one to fight for him. To sacrifice so that he could have a roof over his head, warm clothes, and something good to eat. She'd asked for nothing in return. And knowing that she appreciated him for him, awakened something inside him. It's done. After an unknown amount of time, her voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Oh, already? He asked. It was as if time spent with her passed extremely quickly. She smiled, took 2 steps back, and carefully looked at him for a while. My skill isn't too bad. In fact, it's rather good. And we've saved $20. She smiled as she spoke. Then, she took out a dry towel and flicked off the fine strands of hair that were stuck to his face, neck, and on his clothes. All right, go take a shower, Grace said. Jason took the change of clothes and walked into the narrow bathroom. Knowing that she wanted to conserve energy and keep their bills low, he didn't set the shower too hot as he normally would. Warm water rushed over his body as he stepped in and lowered his head to rinse away any shorn hairs. As he glanced down, he saw the scar on his chest. With time, the scar had grown very shallow. However, every time he saw it, he would think of that woman. The woman who had abandoned him and his father. Perhaps this wound was the only thing he had left of her. He recalled her pushing him away as he knelt and begged her not to leave, and not to abandon him and his father. The woman had shaken her head and pried his hands free. When she shoved him aside so she could leave, he'd fallen on a bit of rebar. Jason's memories didn't remember the construction or the details of the day, aside from what she wore, how her beautiful smile had transformed into a snarl, and how he'd been unable to breathe when the metal he fell on pierced his chest. The doctors had said that the metal had gotten very close to his heart. He was lucky, a centimeter to the left, and they would not have been able to save his life at all. At that time, he had told himself that that woman was no longer his mother. He walled himself off. After his father's death, he stopped having expectations of anyone. As long as he did not have expectations, he would never be disappointed. It was just that. Jason turned off the tap, wiped his body dry with a towel, and put on his clothes. When he walked out of the bathroom, his eyes fell on Grace. She was sitting at the table and seemed to be looking at something. Since when had he started having expectations of her? He was looking forward to seeing her smile, looking forward to her happiness. He lived for those moments when she looked at him with gentle eyes and smiled. Her smile lit up the whole room. Jay. Even the sound of his name on her lips brought him joy. Jay, you're done washing up. I'll help you blow dry your hair, she said as she stood up to get the hairdryer. He walked to the side of the table and saw some documents placed on the table by her side. They were copies of the record of her original case. His eyes flashed. What are you looking at, sister? He asked, even though he already knew the answer. Some of the related information from my case back then, she said. Lena helped me collect them. Why are you reading this again? He asked. Yes, why? Grace had asked herself the same question. It had been 3 years, and she could not reverse the verdict. She did not even know where the witnesses from that year were now. What else could she do just based on her status as a sanitation worker? But could she really give up and accept her false conviction? She knew what the evidence said, but she also knew it wasn't true. She had not been drinking. So there must be some kind of mistake. It simply wasn't possible for her tests to have shown a high level of alcohol in her system. Because she hadn't consumed a drop. Chapter 42. Perhaps, this case, there are still some things that I don't understand, Grace mumbled. And she was determined to get to the bottom of them. She also did not understand why Jennifer's car had been rushing toward her. What made her even more confused was why those witness statements were all targeted at her. She could not explain. All the witnesses and evidence at that time had proven that she was the perpetrator. Admittedly, the accident had been traumatic and some of the details surrounding the investigation that followed were still murky. She'd been in shock, but she couldn't for the life of her understand how there was so much security or camera footage. Almost every street in the city had some kind of traffic camera. And the people who'd been witnesses, they'd all had the exact same version of events. But as an attorney, she knew that rarely happened either. People always had different perceptions, based on their physical position in relation to a crime, their age, sex, and perspective. Even something as simple as running a traffic light could be interpreted in different ways, depending on who you asked. Could it have been something else entirely? Jennifer had been about to marry Jason Reed, president of the Reed Group. She had been in the prime of her life and there had been no reason for her to want to commit suicide by crashing into a car. Grace, do you want to appeal the case? Jai asked. Somehow, I don't think that will do me much good. Grace laughed self-deprecatingly. I just feel a little unreconciled. I know I'm innocent, so it's hard for me to let it go. Jason grunted. Besides, Grace said, closing the folder, it's not easy to overturn a case. I'm out now. I should be thankful for that and just look forward. No one ever said life would be fair, right? Well, let's not talk about this anymore. I'll blow dry your hair. As she spoke, she put away the documents and then used a hairdryer to help him dry his head of wet hair. Jason's eyes gradually deepened, and a plan took form. The next day, Terence saw the dramatic change to Mr. Reed's hairstyle. Gone was the drawn-back ponytail, and in its place were layers that, while still maintaining some length, were short enough to frame his face. He didn't remember scheduling an appointment with a hairstylist, and he knew Mr. Reed's schedule inside and out. What's wrong? Perhaps it was because he had been staring at him for a long time that Jason asked. Terence tilted his head. It seems you haven't had a haircut for a long time. Do you want me to arrange an appointment with the stylist? Terence asked. There's no need. Grace helped me trim my hair last night. So it had been Grace. However, what surprised Terence even more was that Mr. Reed Reed had actually allowed Grace to cut his hair. Mr. Reed wasn't vain, but he did insist on the highest quality products for everything in his life, and that included having his hair maintained by a top-tier hairstylist. Grace was. Now she was just a street sweeper, but even in the past, Grace had been a lawyer, not a hairdresser. The trim isn't too bad, huh? Jason fiddled with his bangs, seeming quite satisfied. The corner of Terence's mouth twitched. I like it. Mr. Reed had always been very picky. If the top-tier hairstylists that had been specially chosen by him found out that they could not compare to the skills of a street sweeper, what would they think? At noon, Lena took time off to meet up with Grace. The two of them found a small restaurant near the sanitation service center to eat at. Lily made things difficult for you that day and asked you to go through the garbage for a long time. Why didn't you tell me? Lena complained. As a good friend, she had only found out about this matter through the news. It's not a big deal, Grace said with a faint smile. Looking at such a good friend, for some reason, Lena's heart ached. It is. It's not fair to you, Grace. You've been through enough. Back in the earlier days of their friendship, Grace seemed to have been blessed by luck. She had made great strides in her studies and had always been the top student in school. Once out in society, she had gotten into the best law firm in the city and even began a relationship with Sean, the most eligible bachelor around. Almost everyone envied her. If she was being honest, even Lena had her days of envy. She was always happy for her friend, but admittedly, sometimes she'd wanted some of that good fortune for herself. After everything that happened to Grace, she felt extra guilty about that now. They would never have expected that one day, Grace would be falsely convicted, subjected to all kinds of horrors in prison, and left to take the only job she could find as a street sweeper. The last insult from Lily, having to dig through garbage for hours, it was too much. What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Grace could not help but sigh as Lena shook her head and frowned. Hey, I'm fine. Really. It's just some garbage. A small smile played on Grace's lips. Besides, if the social media sites are anything to go by, Lily is the one to pay the price for it. People hate her for what she's done. It's an affront on common people, it seems. It's not enough, Grace. Lily has gone overboard. It is one thing for her family to find someone to deal with you in prison. However, They continue to create such difficulties even after you've been released. Lena huffed indignantly. Grace remained silent. Back then, she had suffered a lot in prison. Part of it had come from those who wanted to please Reed Corporation, and the rest had come from those who had been bribed by the Atkinson family. She bore scars from their efforts. Some of those scars would never heal. In the Atkinson family's opinion, I was the one who caused Jennifer's death, Grace said after a long time. She'd expected them to resent her. It was a tragedy. 1/6. It was just that before Lily had given the order to pull out her nails in prison, she had never known that people could be so vicious. In my opinion, compared to her sister's death, she would probably have been happier if you had been the one to pass away. Lena's furious expression had yet to fade. When you were sentenced back then, it wasn't even a month before Lily and Sean got together. With that speed, I don't believe that Lily didn't have any feelings for Sean in the past. This shows that the relationship between Sean and me in the past was insignificant. I know that now, and so does the whole world. When I needed him most, he abandoned me and sided with the people trying to persecute me. It was an accident. I know, Grace allowed. But you were there in the courtroom. The evidence, the way they painted me. It didn't matter that what they said wasn't true. In reality, Lily did me a favor. How's that? Lena was incredulous. By showing me who my true friends really are. Lena's eyes were misted with tears. Grace clasped her hand and squeezed. You've been a good friend to me. I hope you know how much I love and appreciate you. Stop. You are going to make me cry. It's what any person would have done. Grace laughed bitterly. Any person, like say, my parents and half-sister. Or my other friends and work colleagues. Or, I know. What about Sean? The man who'd vowed to love me forever. Lena whistled. Wow. Okay. When you put it like that. I am a superior human being. They both laughed. Sue. Lena allowed. We've established the shitty people in your life. Let's talk about the good ones. She steepled her hands. And rested her chin on them. How are you getting along with that new younger brother? Do you really intend to live with him like this forever? Grace said, nodding. If Jaya is willing to stay with me, I would be very content with the arrangement. If it was someone who didn't know, they would think that you two were dating and living together. Lena asked worriedly, what about him? He doesn't have any improper intentions toward you, does he? No, she said. However, for some reason, when she thought of his dark eyes and strong body, her heart seemed to beat faster. Once more. Hey, you. Lena looked at the red flush on her good friend's face and said in surprise, don't tell me that you are interested in him. No, Grace denied. Lena, you know, I've experienced so many things. Even when I was in prison, I don't intend to be interested in anyone. Those things aren't in the cards for me. When the matter of prison was brought up, Lena's face darkened. Hey, maybe we can consult a doctor again, maybe. No, since I don't intend to get married, there's no point in consulting one, she said. While she was in prison, she had been beaten up so brutally that she suffered internal hemorrhaging. Her uterus was damaged. Although she had recovered after surgery, if she were to get pregnant in the future, she would be facing much higher risks than an ordinary person would. If she could conceive at all. Even the doctor had once advised her not to get pregnant in the future. The complications could prove fatal for both her and her baby. But Grace had no intention of bringing a baby into this world. What kind of life could she provide for her child? A simple existence in a shitty little apartment. And what of the stigma her baby would bear as the child of an ex-convict? She knew how cruel people could be and she would never do that to an innocent baby. Lena's heart ached for her good friend, but she did not know how to comfort her. She could only change the topic and say, by the way, that younger brother of yours after all, he was a stranger before. And I'm not saying this to take away from your happiness, you deserve only the best things, but when you talk about Sean and your dad and our friends, they all knew you. This guy is a total stranger. Who's to say he won't someday change? Just be careful. Okay, I will, Grace said. However, even if I don't know much about Jay, there's one thing I'm certain of. No matter what, he will not harm me. Lena was glad to see the smile on Grace's face, but inside, Lena was panicked. Grace had walled herself off from everyone, except for this young man who was now living with her. She cared about him deeply. It's like she took all the emotion and affection she couldn't give to anyone else and lavished it on him. If Jay were to hurt her, Lena wasn't sure Grace would survive it. Lily had been wading through the pool of the Reed family for almost a whole night before she finally found Jason's ring. She was on the verge of collapse and hypothermia when she was taken to the hospital. She even had to get an IV drip. Of course, when she got hooked up to the drip in the hospital, she did not forget to let her agent take photos and post them on the internet to gain sympathy. After what happened, Lily held a press conference with a sickly appearance. At the press conference, she apologized in public and said that because the ring was given to her by her boyfriend Sean, she cherished it very much. On that day, she had thought that had been the ring she was wearing when she went out. When she was outside, a friend had alerted her that the ring was not on her hand, so she thought that it had fallen off. Therefore, in a moment of anxiety, the situation of her asking people to help her find the ring emerged. "I'm sorry. It was because of my carelessness that so many sanitation workers had to help me find the ring. I, on the other hand, stood to the side and did not look for the ring together with them. I sincerely acknowledge my mistake." Lily apologized with a sincere expression. She looked as if she was on the verge of collapse and gained a lot of sympathies. After a pause, she continued, "I'll go to the sanitation service center to express my sincere gratitude to the sanitation workers who helped me. I'll also donate all of my income from this year's work and use it to set up a breakfast stall. The sanitation workers can get a free breakfast every day with their work pass." Once the video of the press conference was uploaded on the internet, many people felt that Lily's crisis had been handled well. Even the fans kept posting endlessly to help Lily regain her previous, darling, image. As a result, many people felt that this had indeed just been a misunderstanding. Lily's gratitude towards the sanitation service center was also very impressive and even attracted many reporters. The director of the sanitation service center arranged for the sanitation workers who had looked for the ring that day to shake hands with Lily one by one and to receive gifts that she had provisioned for each of them. Each worker had to line up for a press release in which they'd accept Lily's gift of gratitude. Claire took the gift and was very happy. This gift, in addition to the check for $10,000, had come with a down jacket. Looking at the label, she saw that it was a designer brand. She contemplated whether she'd keep it or sell it online for more money. Claire came back into the center and was surprised to see Grace. "Hey, I was wondering where you were. Hurry and go outside. Everyone is lined up from the third shift. Lily is handing out gifts and cash compensation for her mistake. You worked harder than anyone. Go get what's due to you." Claire nudged Grace, who was sitting alone on the chair. "I don't need it." Grace smiled. "This down jacket costs more than $1,000. And the check is for $10K. Are you crazy? Why don't you want them?" Claire couldn't mask her disbelief. Grace shook her head. "I'm not sure what you are thinking right now. Just take the things and leave, you'll be fine," Claire said. She directly pulled Grace up and walked towards the door. "There's no need, Claire. There's really no need," Grace said. However, before she could release herself from Claire's grasp, her entire person had already been pulled outside. "There's still one left who didn't receive the gift," Claire called out. All of a sudden, the cameras and the reporters were aimed at Grace. Grace automatically used her hands to block them. Those cameras made her think of the time when she had been outside the court being swarmed and photographed by the media. The reporters had all been holding microphones and persistently wanting to interview her. And Sean at that time. Grace's eyes spotted Sean standing outside the frame of the cameras. 3 years ago, in prison, that man had stood there coldly. When Lily had said that she was going to impair her hand, he had looked down at her fingers, which were already stained with spots of blood, and said, "Good," in a frosty tone. 3 years later at the country club, when his bastard friend Gregory had accosted her, he'd also stood by. There were some things that, even after 3 years, remained the same. Grace put down her hand and her heart seemed to calm down a little. It's okay. You are okay. She breathed deeply. Lily was the one in the crossfire today, not her. This media circus wasn't out to condemn Grace. Sean stepped into her line of vision. He wouldn't break her gaze. Although Grace looked the same as before, she seemed to have weathered many storms. She was no longer wearing high-end fashion but a fluorescent uniform. Sean was in a daze. The scene of her crawling to him in prison, begging him to believe her appeared before his eyes again. Back then, her gaze had been eager, hopeful, and pleading. However, she looked calm at the moment. Like she didn't need him. Or anyone in this world. Her strength was a force all its own. Lily sensed it too and her smile slipped. She was terrified, he realized. With the cameras and press closing in and snapping photos, what if Grace were to start railing about how they'd treated her and abused her? What if she attacked them for this ridiculous stunt with the ring? The press would devour such a story and no one would believe that this ring episode that happened at the exact place where Jennifer Stevens' murderer worked was a coincidence. As it was a stretch for Lily to be anywhere near this neighborhood. Sean held his breath, waiting to see what Grace would do next. Lily glanced at him from the corner of her eyes, and he knew that she was thinking the same things as him. She smiled amicably as she handed the gift box to Grace and said, "This is for you. I'm sorry for making you search for my ring." The other day, her behavior was entirely different from how vicious she had been previously. Grace quietly took the gift box without saying a word and turned to leave. After Grace got back into the center, she handed the box to Claire, saying, "Here, you take it." "Oh, don't you want to keep the clothing?" Claire asked in amazement. "I have enough clothes," Grace replied. "The check's still in here." "I don't want it," Grace said. She looked at the clock and saw that the lunch break was about to end. After picking up the tools, she headed toward the section of a highway that she had been assigned to sweep. Grace heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that the reporters who had come for the event had left. However, when she stepped out of the sanitation service center, she saw Sean walking toward her. Fear trickled up her spine and she hated herself for that momentary reaction. "How have you been?" Sean asked. He had used to hate this woman. He hated her for causing Jennifer's death and for all the drama that followed. She had caused him to be reprimanded by his family, and his family had almost been destroyed by her. No one wronged the Reed group. No one. Because of Grace, he'd had to pay the price for it. However, when he saw her wearing the sanitation worker's uniform, he frowned. After all, he had once loved this woman. She shook her head. "I believe that it is none of Mr. Stevens' business whether I'm doing fine," Grace replied. Flatly as she tried to walk away from him. "Grace, you don't know what's good for you," Sean said as he blocked her way. "Do I not know what's good for me?" Grace sneered. She looked at Sean directly and asked, "Do you intend to get Lily your fiancé to pull out my fingernails and break my fingers again? Will it make you happy if I become unable to even hold a broom in the future?" "It had been 3 years, Sean. I still have pain." She shut down immediately, likely resenting that she said that much. Sean rubbed his chin. He did what he'd had to do back then. And she had brought it upon herself. Grace laughed harshly. "I can't believe you are even here right now. Back then, when I had needed you the most, you treated me like some stranger on the street. You let me suffer, you encouraged people to torture me. And now you are standing here, asking if I'm doing fine. What a joke." Sean frowned. What she said was true. You have to bear the consequences of your actions, Grace. You deserved to be punished. You caused the death of Lily's sister. And she was within her right to seek revenge. You can't complain about what she did to you. Grace's face turned pale. "Actually, I can. We have laws, Sean. And while we both know that no one will care about the accusations of some lowly sanitation worker, the fact remains that you and Lily broke the law. You abused your power. What you did was criminal, and someday the truth might come out. What then? I'm not going to debate with you," Sean said. "You killed an innocent woman. And not even your own family sympathized." Sean snapped. Then he calmed down. "Look, the past is behind us." After letting out a sigh, he said, when I'm back in the office, I'll inform the manager in my human resource department to get you a clerical job in one of the companies under the Stevens Group. It will be better than sweeping the streets every day. Grace pursed her lips, finding Sean's offer to be absurd. He, what exactly, wanted to assuage his guilt by getting her a job. It was his fault she'd been unemployable everywhere else in the city. She started to walk away from him. Don't walk away from me, Sean said angrily. I'm still talking to you. Seriously, Grace, I'm already taking a risk by offering to help you. Did anyone ever ask you to take that risk? Grace asked flatly. Did you ever hear of too little, too late, Sean? When I needed you most, you abandoned me. She shook her head. There is no need for this. Moreover, aren't you afraid that your fiancé will hear about what? A sharp voice asked. Sean's eyes widened. What is it that you are keeping from me? Sean froze. He released his grip on Grace's arm immediately and turned to look at Lily, who was walking toward him. It's nothing, he said quietly. Lily arched a brow. She swept up to Sean and looped her arm through his. Sean, darling, why did you stop to talk to this kind of person? Aren't you afraid that Jason Reed will hear about it? You know my sister is the only woman Jason ever loved. Although my sister has been dead for 3 years, he has never had another woman. Although Lily did not complete her sentence, everyone knew what she meant. Sean's face paled when he remembered the projection ads that had been taken down and Jason Reed's refusal to attend their engagement banquet. There were far-reaching effects of angering Mr. Reed. Effects neither he nor Stevens Corporation could afford. His family reckoned that it was because of Grace that Jason had refused to meet them. But now, he didn't know what to think. Grace, you are only fit to be a sanitation worker. Lily smiled cruelly. And you're so good at it. Grace's eyes narrowed. She was furious. Lily's recent actions weren't helping, and for once, Sean wished she would just shut up instead of being so spiteful. Do you think Mr. Reed knows that you are already out of prison? She tapped her chin with her free hand. He made your life a living hell in there, didn't he? Grace shuddered. Funny, if he doesn't know it already, he just might recognize you on the news from our interviews today. Maybe you should think about relocating. I believe that before long, you will no longer be able to survive in the city, Lily said. With that, she walked away, with Sean holding him by the arm. Grace watched them leave. She took her tools and headed toward a section of the highway, riding on the bicycle provided by the sanitation service center. Grace had already buried the feelings that she had had for Sean. Any emotions she had for him had died long ago. Seeing him again, while a bit of a surprise, didn't stir anything in her heart. It didn't even raise much amity. He was just dead to her. She didn't feel anything for him. And seeing Sean and Lily holding each other intimately, they deserved each other. Grace left and went about her work, oblivious to a figure who was standing in one corner, witnessing the scene. In the news agency, reporter Brian was watching the news about Lily's visit to the sanitation service center to offer her apologies to the sanitation workers. It wasn't the kind of fluff piece he wanted to cover, but she'd been the city's darling, and his boss had set him on the story, so he covered it. When he saw a dark-haired woman appearing on the screen, he started to frown. He found this woman familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her. Who is this woman? Why does she look so familiar? Brian watched the news footage over and over again, and then he finally noticed that some other details popped out to him. First, Lily's hands clenched the gift box and her smile turned brittle when this woman exited the center and approached the press conference. Second, the woman bore none of the excitement that her co-workers had. On the contrary, she looked positively resentful to be there, which was odd, considering every employee that participated in the Atkinson dumpster fire. He laughed at his own pun for Lily's social media debacle, had been thrilled to receive the compensation check and luxury apparel. Not this woman though. Then he noticed that in the background, Sean had visibly paled and began to look very uneasy the minute this woman appeared. Sean. Brian seemed to have thought of something and he started to search through the internet. After a while, he found a piece of news that had been reported 3 years ago. A picture of the woman who had received the gift. From Lily. Only she looked beautiful, vibrant in a way that he was shocked it was the same woman. This is too much of a coincidence. Brian explained. 3 years ago, that woman had been Sean's girlfriend. Fast forward to today, and the successful attorney was sweeping the streets. That was a hell of a tumble. And this woman just so happened to be receiving a gift from Sean's current girlfriend as an apology. Quote, Brian rubbed his hands together. If he'd had a mustache, he would have given it a twirl. He laughed to himself as his excitement grew. There was a story here. A juicy one. Where others had missed this one integral detail, he'd seen it. And he was going toast on it. He dug into forming his story and drafting it. Although there were more salacious ways to capitalize on the direction of his thoughts, he kept to the facts. With a story like this, it wouldn't matter. He was fine to let the public speculate. That would just encourage more people to read. When he handed his work to the editor rejected it and told him to rewrite it. Why must I rewrite it? Brian asked unhappily. To be frank, he was offended. He'd done a damn good job catching this anomaly and building out the story around it. Seriously, why do you want it rewritten? This is a slam dunk. You have to see that this is headline worthy. The management has passed down instructions that we are not to approve any write-up about Grace Cummins, the editor replied. Brian asked in amazement, is the Stevens or Atkinson family behind this? It didn't make any sense to him. When he had written about Lily earlier on, the editor had approved his news. However, he was not allowed to write anything about Grace. It's not them. That's enough. Don't ask any more questions. In any case, if this piece of news gets released, not only will you lose your job as a reporter, but I will be sacked as well. The editor said. Brian rubbed his eyes. To say he was shocked was an understatement. What the editor had said seemed too much of an exaggeration. Grace is merely a sanitation worker. Who would want to protect her? You are too young. In this world, there are many things beyond your imagination, the editor replied with a sigh. He was also puzzled about why Mr. Reed was out to protect Grace. Meanwhile, as Jason watched Grace putting away the utensils, he said, I heard that the woman who told you to search for her ring has gone to the sanitation service center to offer her apologies. Yes, Grace replied, but I have given her gift to Claire. Did you see Sean? I saw from the news that he showed up with his fiancée, Lily. As he talked, he watched Grace carefully for her reaction. Yes, I saw him, Grace replied. She looked calm, as though she was talking about someone who was of no concern to her. Jason crossed the room toward her. How do you feel? Did seeing Sean again make you sad? When Grace heard the question, she lifted her head to look at him. I think I know what you are getting at. She smiled softly. Jay, are you worried about me? Don't worry, please. I promise you, I would not grieve over such a man. Worried. Jason's gaze deepened. Other than being worried about her, there was something else. Grace lifted her hand to stroke his head. Recently, she had been doing this more frequently. It was a tender gesture, and he'd be lying if he didn't say that he liked the feel of her hands on him. Even if it was a touch so innocent as tucking his hair back. Jay, Sean is nothing to me. I will not be sad over someone who doesn't love me. If I was sad, it would mean I still loved him. Jason searched her eyes for any tell that she was just saying what he wanted to hear. Truly, she said, I'm glad I no longer feel anything at all when I saw him. And I'm even more glad that I didn't marry Sean back then. Oh, wouldn't your life have been much easier if he'd supported you? You might be married to him right now and not have to work a day. That's not a benchmark for happiness, she said. And I don't mind work. What I meant was, Grace said, if my emotions could fade, then they were not that strong to begin with. Her statement rang true to him. And hearing her assert that her emotions had not been strong for Sean, filled him with a sense of relief. The accident and everything that transpired, it revealed Sean's true nature. And for that, I am grateful. It was a blessing to know that he was not the man for me. Jason reflected on her words for a moment. Conflict, hardships, loss, they were what defined us. Grace had been dealt a terrible hand, but she'd risen above it. Maybe not financially, as she was strapped to a low-income job and living in a low-income apartment, but she was determined to be positive and happy. That was more than he could say for most of the people who ran in his circles. They had money and opportunity. Most of them squandered it with selfish decisions or idiocy. Still, something of what she'd said had him wondering. Sister, will you feel sad for me one day? It wasn't fair, he realized, but he couldn't help it. He wanted to possess her attention, even her negative emotions. Grace was shocked by the question and she was at a loss for words. Will you? He asked as he bent down, moving closer to her. As he crowded her, he watched her pupils dilate and the way her pulse skittered at the base of her neck. She sucked a tiny breath. When her gaze fixed on his, he could see her attraction and her uncertainty. What I meant earlier was, if I loved a person, I would be sad. However, Jay, you're my brother. Grace replied, her mouth dry. Can't you love your brother? Jason asked. We are, after all, family. He used his knuckles to lift up her chin, and he angled closer to her so she'd have no doubt of his intentions. Grace shook her head to clear it. This was her brother, and he likely didn't mean what he'd said. The way she was taking it. It was an innocent question. She shouldn't read too much into it. This attraction she felt was one-sided and couldn't go anywhere. If she crossed that line, she'd only stand to lose him. He deserved better than that. They both did. She swallowed hard and averted her gaze. Of course, I would be sad over you. I care for you deeply. As you did for Sean before you learned the truth about him. Actually, she felt more for Jay. But she couldn't tell him that. If he misinterpreted her meaning, there would be no putting the genie back in the bottle. And the last thing she wanted was any awkwardness or distance between them. She valued his friendship too fiercely. Grace cleared her throat and said, I can love my younger brother. But that isn't the same kind of love. Oh, Jason wasn't letting her off the hook, and the whole conversation was making her want to cringe. It's two different feelings. I thought loving someone was forever and irreplaceable. I even thought that lovers could live and die together. What a romantic notion, Jason thought. Surely, this was the stuff of fairy tales, 3D projector billboards, and living happily ever after. He had no experience with such things. His parents certainly were no example. Nor any of his colleagues or associates. Ads by Pub Future. That kind of love, to live or die together. It seemed all-encompassing, all-empowering. Why did he suddenly want to experience such a thing? And with Grace, what did this mean for him? Had he fallen in love with her? No, of course not. He didn't believe in that kind of love, and he challenged anyone who did to prove that it was honest and true, and lasting. But he did admit that he had feelings for her. There was a sentimental attachment, yes. That was it. And physical attraction. He studied her and realized that he also had become reliant, obsessed, with the feeling of being next to her. He wanted to know her whereabouts, to be there when she came home, and to ensure her safety. He acknowledged that he liked being near her, and he was okay with it. Why else would he have played this game for so long? There was nothing wrong with enjoying someone else's company. If he was really honest with himself, he was falling into deeper emotional territory. But to fall in love, he couldn't have done that. He'd made a promise to himself long ago to never fall in love with any woman. And Jay would never make me sad, right? The gentle tone of her voice resounded in his ear. He chuckled lowly as he studied her blushing cheeks and a faint smile. He'd give her the out, for now, and fall back into their comfortable position of brother, sister in this little insular world they'd created. Your brother will never make you sad, he said, because that was the answer she wanted to hear. And he meant it. Protecting her for life was as easy as lifting a finger for him. Hell, his accountants could probably find some tax write-off for it. When she stared at him, her eyes so earnest and hopeful, he felt a pang of unease. He'd promised not to make her sad, yet, when she one day discovered that he was not Jay Smith, some vagrant worker, and was actually Jason Reed, president of Reed Corporation. How would she react to the lie he'd been living? Sad was likely an understatement. This woman had built up walls all around her and he'd been let in. It wasn't really a question of if he would hurt her, but when. Grace went to work the next day. After she finished sweeping the streets with Claire, they returned to the sanitation center for their lunch break. However, she noticed that her colleagues were giving her sidelong glances one at a time. Some glances were looks of curiosity, while others were filled with disdain, mockery, and pity. And many of them were pointing at her as they whispered amongst themselves. Grace found it weird and noticed Claire walking toward her from the supply closet, who then pulled her aside and quietly asked, "Grace, were you in jail?" Grace was shaken and her face instantly paled. It was as if all of her previous doubts had suddenly been clarified. She'd never lied on her application and she was forthright with her incarceration and her commitment to being a productive member of society again, but that information should have been private. Although she'd already mentally prepared herself for this, knowing that every secret had its way of surfacing. This one, about her past, was inevitable. She supposed she was lucky to have made it this. And yet, when surrounded by people who were gazing at her with varying degrees of shock and disgust and disdain as they casually discussed her past as if they had any right to judge her, she still felt like she was standing naked in a frozen tundra. Her co-workers stared and pointed. The secret was officially out. They all knew about her imprisonment. She hummed in agreement. "Oh, you're such a good kid, why were you in jail?" "What did you do?" Claire asked. She had rushed over for confirmation after someone else had told her about it. So apparently the gossip mill hadn't filled her in yet on the specifics. "Manslaughter caused by drunk driving," Grace said. "In most cases of drunk driving, even if it causes death, the punishment is usually imprisonment with a suspension of sentence as well as having to provide compensation, but the Atkinson family was adamant about not taking a single penny from me. They just wanted me to be in jail." She swallowed hard and waited for Claire to rebuff her. "I spent 3 years in prison before being released." "Oh, you," Claire sighed. "I heard you were a lawyer back then, but now you've fallen so low that you sweep the streets with me, which is very sad indeed. You should never drink and drive." Claire chattered on but did not use a critical gaze to study Grace, which filled her heart with relief. Just then, Farah Steele walked over, glanced briefly at Grace with unmasked contempt, and said, "Honestly, Claire, why are you talking to her?" Before Claire could reply, she went on, "This woman has been to jail. She's taken a woman's life. Farah, we're all colleagues. And there are privacy issues to consider. It isn't private if it's all over the internet." She had a point. "Why are you defending her, Claire? Grace went to jail for drunken, reckless driving. She killed someone. That's not fair, Farah. People make mistakes, accidents happen." Claire had barely started speaking when Farah interrupted her again. "But the person she killed was Jennifer Atkinson. Do you know who Jennifer Atkinson is? She's Lily Atkinson's sister." It was no coincidence that Lily was here. "I was wondering why Lily wanted so many of our colleagues to look for a non-existent ring. But it's all clear now. It was because she was targeting Grace and we all got dragged into it." "But didn't she also apologize and compensate us?" Claire asked. "Farah, that compensation is half of what many of us make in a year," Farah sputtered. Her mouth turned down and her eyes narrowed. She was clearly not pleased with Claire standing up for Grace. "I knew you would take her side," she said. "When I told the others." So it was obvious who had been the one to leak the news of Grace's imprisonment. No surprise there. Farah had never made any false show of being friendly with Grace. "I knew it when I saw her on the roadside talking to Shannon. Then Lily. I was like, wait for a second, this isn't right. I knew things were not as they seemed." She stared at Grace. "I don't know how you live with yourself. You should have stayed in prison. It's what you deserve." "Now, hold up," Claire argued. "That's enough of that talk. This is none of your business, Farah. You can't go harassing another employee. Harassing. She is a killer." "Honestly, Claire, what, did you receive a bribe from Grace or something? Why are you standing up for her?" Farah mocked her, but Claire also took a step back. She had, indeed, accepted the jacket and payment Grace received from Lily. Grace opened her mouth, ready to defend herself, but someone beat her to it. All right, what else is there to say? A man's voice interrupted. The car crash was an accident. Grace didn't intend to do it. Grace saw that it was Chase defending her. However, that only angered Farah more. Farah was interested in Chase, but he wouldn't give her the time of day. The fact that he was defending Grace instead of taking Farah's side was only instigating the situation. Farah's expression turned uglier. Chase, what's the point of standing up for Grace? Do you think she'll like you? Do you know that her ex-boyfriend is Sean Stevens? He's the heir to The Stevens Corporation. Chase's face abruptly flushed red. Farah continued her vicious assault. But when Sean saw Grace as a sanitation worker that day, it probably spoiled his appetite. She clicked her tongue and continued, "You know, I'm thinking he'll probably vomit in disgust when he thinks about dating Grace in the past." Grace looked at Farah coldly. "Are you done talking? What? Are you trying to deny the fact that you were in jail, or are you saying that you aren't Sean's ex-girlfriend?" Farah retorted proudly. "Why are you pretending to be so innocent when you've been to jail?" "I'm not pretending about anything. So what if I've been to jail? I've paid my taxes and I've served my time. And I don't think it's any of your business who I dated before. Furthermore, I may be a sanitation worker now, but does that mean I can't have dated anyone before? Or is the role of a sanitation worker only to make someone throw up their dinner? Just what are you saying about sanitation workers?" Farah recoiled and eyed the room warily. She'd offended many of the people here by bringing the sanitation aspect into things. Grace spat out a succession of questions. "Farah Steele, just because you're an established employee in a management position, that does not mean you can look down on my profession." Farah's words stuck in her throat as some of the other workers nodded in solidarity. There were so many sanitation workers in the center and now they all looked angry. "I get it," Grace said. "You have a slightly exalted position and you want to abuse that power and look down on everybody beneath you. Whatever. It's fine for you to insult me, but take a good look at the people in this room, Farah. They're honest and hardworking and they do what they do to support their families. Why don't you think about that before insulting them or their professions?" A smattering of agreement sounded behind her and Grace smirked. "You bullies, you are all the same." Farah glared at her hatefully. "Grace, you, wait and see." Grace just nodded. "Yeah, I'll be here. You know where to find me." Grace exhaled a deep breath and turned to leave, but Chase Plus shouted after her, "Wait. Grace, I don't think you're the person Farah says you are." She stopped walking for a moment, but she did not respond to him and resumed walking away. She was very grateful that Chase was willing to stand up for her just now, but that didn't mean anything. He knew who she was and what shadows were in her past. Even if he'd liked her before, those feelings would change now. They always did. Grace was lost in her thoughts that night when she returned to the apartment. Just as she was having dinner with Jay, someone knocked at the door, and Grace was startled because she doesn't usually have visitors. Could it be your family? Grace wasn't up to another visit from her dad or stepmom, and it would be a long time before she'd forgive Evelyn for her treachery. But when she opened the door, she was surprised to see Chase standing outside. Chase was wearing a black cotton shirt and his face was slightly red. He looked at Grace and spoke rather uneasily. He had barely opened his mouth when he noticed Jason, who had walked over to stand behind Grace, and he stopped suddenly as if he was ads by Pub Future. Hesitating. "Why are you here?" Jason asked. "Are you looking for my sister?" Jason asked. I have some business to discuss with Grace privately," Chase said with a flushed face. Then he glanced at Grace and asked, "Is that okay with you, Grace?" Jason frowned. Grace opened her mouth to reply, but Jay interrupted her and said, "Is it something you can't discuss here?" "It's..." Chase hesitated. Grace said, "If there's something you need to say, there's no harm in speaking frankly, and in front of Jay. www Chase started to wring his hands. I wanted to say that I don't mind that you've been in jail. I really like you and I hope that you can be my girlfriend. I can wait. As long as you're not interested in anyone else, I can wait, he blurted out in a single breath as if he had had to muster all of his courage to say those words. Grace was stunned. Chase, I don't know what to say. Chase kept talking. I know I'm still just a small-time driver but I will work hard to earn money to support a family. I just hope I can give you happiness. As soon as Chase was done talking, he nodded in Jason's direction, bowed toward Grace, and hurried away. Just consider it, he said as his parting words. Grace stared numbly at his back. Chase really liked her. Only when a hand looped around her waist to pull her into the room and the door slammed shut did she snap out of her trance. What are you? She had barely finished speaking when Jay trapped her against the door. He leaned forward and stared at her fixedly with his dark eyes. What are you thinking about, sister? But there was a bite to his words, and the way he normally called her sister felt more like a promise or a threat. Nothing, she replied. He closed the space between them until she couldn't draw a breath without breathing him in. Let me go, Jay. And yet, it was as if he did not hear her. He pressed his face closer to her instead and his lips lightly grazed her ear. She sucked in a breath. Sister, were you touched by what that man said just now? Touched. Her laugh was sad. That I don't know, but I am surprised. I'm a convict, Jay. Accused of taking a human life. What man would want to be with me? Did you invite him here? No. She shook her head. And I truly didn't expect Chase to just show up and say those things. He frowned. I don't trust him. Sister, do you like that man because he said those things? Jason asked. His dark eyes continued to bore into hers. The unsettling feeling tickled up her spine. It felt a lot like attraction or anticipation. But this was her brother, and she needed to push those thoughts from her mind. Grace cleared her throat. No, I don't like Chase. He tilted his head and a lock of his thick hair shadowed one eye. Jay was a handsome man, and that boyish tilt of his head only amplified his good looks. Grace sucked in a breath. But it carried more of his scent and had her wanting to lean close to see if that smooth bit of skin along his neck tasted as good as it smelled. She searched his eyes, swallowed hard as his gaze dipped to her mouth then back to her eyes again. Did he want to kiss her? Oh God, what am I thinking? Grace laughed at herself at the idea that had just crossed her mind. Are you sure? He pressed her. Ads by Pub Future. What was he asking about? Her mind was on kissing. Chase. Right. No, I don't like Chase, she replied. I can only apologize to him for his feelings for me. Her reply seemed to please him. His lips curved. He was likely trying to protect her, as any brother would. She would be smart not to think about having a normal future. Even if a man proclaimed that her past didn't bother him, she knew, over time, it would. Jason stared at her and asked once more, Sister, do you really not like that man? Why would I lie to you? She retorted. Ever since I got out of jail, I've never even considered the idea of falling in love with someone. I did that once. I put all of my emotions into someone else, and when I was abandoned, I was struck by a devastating blow. I don't wish to go through that again. There was a touch of joy in his eyes. Then you have to remember to reject him. If not, a man like him will probably wait for you forever. I'll reject him, she said. And she would. Chase deserved better. Since I don't reciprocate his feelings, I won't string him along. Chase is a good man. He should have a relationship with someone who truly belongs to him and not waste time on me. Jay's lips thinned. How does he know that you have been to jail? He asked suddenly. Grace's face darkened as she said, a colleague found out about the news of my car accident all those years ago, so now the entire sanitation service center knows about my imprisonment. As she said it, Grace was overcome with shame. She wouldn't forget their accusing stares, the whispering, the sidelong looks. All right, let go of me, I still have to tidy up the room. Jason let her go. This woman's moods affected his own. Her bits of joy buoyed him. Her sadness transferred until he wanted to right the wrongs of the world just to see her smile. For a man like him, such feelings were not acceptable. This was a game. A diversion. He'd wanted a glimpse behind her facade because he'd harbored many doubts about Grace Cummins. But every day spent with her was like peeling back another layer, and what he saw didn't match what he'd thought of her originally. He was growing attached. Even this pitiful apartment was a delight he looked forward to, only because Grace was in it. He didn't know how long they could play this game or live in this insulated bubble. But as he thought it, his subconscious chimed that he could do this for the rest of his life. For the next few days, Grace's colleagues continued to whisper and gossip about her at the sanitation service center, and plenty of them were intentionally distancing themselves from her. She had already mentally prepared herself for this. She could not change the fact that she had been in jail, after all. But somehow knowing what would transpire and actually experiencing it were two different things. The callous and cruel gossip hurt. However, Claire treated Grace as usual, taking care of her when they were doing their regular jobs, which she was grateful for. Grace, you are a university graduate, why did you find a job like this? Do you really want to sweep roads for the rest of your life? Claire chatted with Grace during their lunch break. I have a criminal record and it isn't that easy to look for a job, Grace said frankly. Many employers asked about the incident when they found out that I had a criminal record. When they realized that I was the perpetrator who killed Mr. Reed's fiancée, Jennifer Atkinson, they all rejected me without any exception. Even in the past, it was already such a difficult task being able to find a job to provide for me. But you can't waste your years doing this job. How can you find a good husband like this? Grace smiled at Claire. She meant well, truly. The biggest concern for people like Claire was marriage. Chase doesn't seem to mind your past, Claire went on. Are you sure you don't want to consider it? Honest men like Chase are rare nowadays. No, it's impossible for me and him, Grace replied. She wouldn't give Claire any hope, lest she tries to interfere. That would just end badly, for all of them. Claire hesitated before asking, Grace, do you think of Chase as a lower class because he's just a driver? After all, your ex-boyfriend was, quote, Claire. Grace interrupted her and said, I don't think that. It's just, I've been through so much, I'm not wanting to get into a relationship. Ads by Pub Future. Oh, your child. Claire sighed. You should know that if you really don't marry and stay by yourself, you might not feel it that much now, but when you are old with no children around you, it's going to be a kind of loneliness that no one can endure. Children. Grace smiled wryly. I'm afraid that's wishful thinking. For me, it wasn't just issues of conception. She was not some wealthy or powerful person who could ensure that her children would be protected. Would she subject them to ridicule or bullying? Kids were mean, and she suspected that if schoolmates learned of Grace's past, they might pick on her children. No, she would not allow that. After a day's worth of work, Grace and Claire packed up their tools and returned to the sanitation service center. When Grace was returning the tools, she did not come across Farah Steele, who had been constantly targeting her. However, just as she was preparing to wash her hands, she saw Farah and Chase standing by the sink. Grace has been to prison, Chase. Why are you still waiting for her? Does that mean I'm not as good as a person who's been in jail? Farah asked indignantly. Chase replied unhappily, can you not talk about her being in prison every time you open your mouth? Grace was driving carelessly. She didn't mean to hurt anyone. She was driving under the influence. How is that unintentional? Farah retorted. She's AF Kungwich. And you're some fool. Who's fallen under her spell. I would be willing to be under her spell. Chase answered. Grace heard the details of their conversation were still related to her and subconsciously wanted to avoid them. However, just as she wanted to leave, Farah noticed her and immediately shouted, Grace, you're so shameless that you are eavesdropping. Grace sighed and stopped in her tracks. This is a place in the sanitation service center that everyone can visit. I came here to wash my hands. How is that eavesdropping? If you are afraid that someone else will hear you, then you should look for a room and talk behind closed doors, Grace said. You Farah glared at Grace angrily, then made a nasty remark before leaving, "You wait and see." Grace smiled faintly. "I heard that so many times when I was in jail." Chase glanced at Grace uneasily and said, "Don't take what she said just now to heart." "I won't take it to heart," Grace said. Maybe it was a blessing that she should come upon Chase like this. "This is my life, Chase. The ridicule, the gossip. It isn't fun and it isn't pretty. I would defend you," he vowed. And his eyes were so earnest. She wished she was a different person and that she could be the kind of woman that Chase needed. "I know you would. You are a good man. Seriously, Grace. Give me a chance." She shook her head. "I don't want you to waste time on me." It's like what she said. "I've been to jail and am not suitable for you." "I don't mind that," he hurriedly replied. When his eyes met her confused gaze, he explained, I know you are a good woman, so I really don't mind if you've been to jail." Chase recalled the first time he'd encountered Grace. Back then, he had just gotten off work and had noticed her squatting by the roadside. She had been continuously comforting a young girl who was bawling. She had sung and jumped, making all sorts of funny poses as if she did not care at all about the strange glances coming from the surrounding crowd. Ultimately, she had succeeded and the little girl had stopped crying. Then, she bought a bun for the little girl to eat on the spot. She called the police and waited there, intending to see if the little girl's family would come looking for her. In the end, the police and the little girl's family did arrive. The child had wandered off and gotten really lost, walking the city alone for hours. The parents were a train wreck, crying in, offering Grace their life savings for protecting and finding their daughter. Grace had only laughed and refused to accept a penny from them. When the parents had left with the little girl in their arms, she had ads by Pub Future, stood studying the backs of the family with a content smile. At that time, Chase felt as if his heart had been stolen straight out of his chest. It wasn't just Grace's beauty, but her kindness, her gentility, the quiet way she made the world a little bit better. He did not know if it was love at first sight, but he knew that it was the first time in his life that he had ever had such feelings for a woman. Quote, "Even if you don't mind, what about your parents?" Grace asked, drawing him back to the present. "Would they also not mind you marrying a woman who's been in prison?" Grace asked. Chase's body froze and his stomach dropped. Marriage is not only an affair between two people. It's also a matter between two families. "You don't know how my family is like either," Grace said. "Please, don't seek to do something that will bring shame upon you or your family, Chase." She laughed, but it was without humor. "Besides, I don't think you really want to get involved with my family." She walked past him to the sink to wash her hands. She kept her back to him. "I don't have the feelings for you that you seek. Please, don't waste your time on me." Chase stood aside in a daze as if he had been slapped by her words just now. Just as Grace finished washing her hands and wanted to leave, Chase suddenly said, "What if I can persuade my parents?" She halted her footsteps and glanced at him. "That's impossible. If I really liked you, I would still be willing to stay by your side. Even if your parents disagreed, and I would be with you till your parents gave us their blessing. However, I only see you as a friend and feel no love toward you." Her words could be considered ruthless. Surely, it felt like she cut him with each word she said. Chase's stomach sank lower. When Grace got off work and walked to the entrance of the sanitation service center, she was surprised to see a familiar figure standing not far away, as if he had intentionally been waiting for her. "Jay," she called out in surprise and ran toward him. "Why are you here?" "I got off work early today, so I came to pick you up," he replied, reaching for her hand. He threaded their fingers together. Just then, Chase walked out of the sanitation service center. When he saw Grace and Jason, he nodded his head awkwardly and walked toward the parking lot. "Did you reject him properly?" Jason asked nonchalantly. "Yes, I've made it clear I do not want him and that there is no future for us," Grace said. Those words might have been hurtful to Chase, but a temporary pain is better than a longer one. She glanced away. "But I don't think he will suffer long or waste too much time on me. He can find a better woman," she said. "I admit that I'm not a great beauty. Furthermore, my current job is not one that most would aspire to. And I have a criminal record. I really don't know why he's so determined to be with me. He's the one who isn't worthy of you. Sister, you can find a better man, Jason replied. Grace smiled, making light of his words. So, you were holding on to Chase while getting it on with another man. Farah's voice suddenly sounded out. Grace felt a headache coming on. The world seemed never to lack people like Farah Steele. Grace would have said something snarky to that effect, and that maybe Farah should spend some time in jail. It was filled with nasty people just like her. But she didn't bother engaging. Jason turned around and looked coldly at the woman behind them. There was a flash of surprise in Farah's eyes when she saw Jason. This man was even more handsome than the male leads in the TV series. His hair was a mess. Too long and unkempt, but if the bangs were cut shorter and if he were to wear some decent clothes, he could definitely push the male stars out of their spots on the ranking TV series. Farah was immediately jealous. Why does Grace deserve all of this? Not only is she liked by Chase, but she also has such a handsome man accompanying her. It was bullshit. She raised the corners of her mouth and flashed a vicious smile. Are you Grace's friend? You probably don't know that she has been in prison. Back then, she hit someone while drunk driving. It adds by pub future was the same as murder. However, to her disappointment, the man's face did not show a look of surprise, disbelief, or indeed any sign of caring about what she had said. Instead, he still looked calm. And that cold, calm had her taking a step back. His gaze on her grew even colder after hearing what she said. Looks like you were the person who was spreading rumors about this matter, Jason said quietly as if Farah had just confirmed what he'd suspected. Fear rose in Farah's heart. She felt that if she admitted to it then and there, she would end up suffering serious consequences. But why should she bear the brunt of anything? She wasn't a murderer, Grace was. She bit her lip and then said, so what if I was? I did this for everyone's sake. We all have the right to know if the people around us have committed a crime. If she is afraid that others will find out about it, then she shouldn't have done it in the first place. Jason let out a soft laugh. It's good that you admitted to it. After that, he no longer paid attention to Farah. He turned to Grace and said, Sister, let's go. I don't want to bother with this woman anymore. Okay. Grace ignored her as if Farah was trash to be swept off the street. The couple turned and walked away. Farah stared at the two people's retreating backs. Sister, was this man Grace's younger brother? But they didn't look alike. Not only that, Grace and the man seemed to be about the same age. The man flashed one icy glare over his shoulder. Farah felt that look all the way to her bones. Grace was still holding on to Jason, but she did not start walking home. Instead, she pulled him in another direction. I got my paycheck today. Let's go shopping and have a good meal, she said. Speaking of which, Jai, we haven't had a good meal out since we met. Then let's go and have a good meal, Jason said. But I'll treat you. After all, I've been earning money too, and you've been taking care of me all this while. For some reason, Grace felt as if her own child had grown up. Then let's have you treat me, Grace smiled and said. She didn't linger on her encounter with Chase or on the mean things that Farah said. Jason was with her, and he accepted her for who she was. The two of them walked to a mall in the center of the city. In the mall, Grace picked a popular restaurant for them to eat at. The dishes in this restaurant are not bad, and their prices are affordable. I used to eat here with my colleagues before. She paused halfway through her sentence. In the past, she and her law firm colleagues had often come here to have a meal after work. For her at that time, eating here was like having a work meal. But now, it had become a luxurious event that could only be enjoyed every once in a while. She tried not to dwell on that too much. She'd taken many things for granted in her prior life. If she was smart, she would appreciate every little thing. Life was too fickle for anything less. That's good. I'm glad that we're eating at a place you're familiar with. You can do the ordering then. Jason cleanly interrupted her thoughts. Grace ordered all the cheaper dishes, with the most expensive one being a shrimp dish. Although it wasn't a lot of money, it was already the most expensive meal Grace had had for a while. That was despite the fact that Jason kept trying to persuade her to order a little more. I have money. However, Grace still said, this is enough. Even if it's for a good ads by pub future meal, there's no need to order too much. After a while, the waiter served the dishes, and they started to eat. The dishes here were naturally much better than the simple ones they usually ate at the apartment. When they started to eat the shrimp, Jason peeled them for Grace, and then put all of the shelled shrimp into her bowl. She stared at them in a daze. What's wrong? Why aren't you eating? He asked. She smiled faintly and said, I'm just thinking about how you're very good at taking care of people. Anyone who gets the chance to date you in the future will be very lucky. As she said this, she lifted a shrimp into her mouth. She still remembered the times when she used to watch TV series. Once, when she had seen the male lead peeling shrimp for the female lead, she had felt very warm inside. It was a romantic gesture. The kind of small and thoughtful act that came from someone who cared about their partner. Although this was a very small act, it still gave people a feeling of being cherished, even loved. Looking back, Sean had never peeled a shrimp for her. He'd never filled her dish with the choicest pieces of food. He only pulled her chair out for her if they were at a corporate event and other people were expecting it. In fact, in hindsight, when they were dating in the past, it was obvious that although Sean said that he loved her, the feelings he Titan Esports, B2B Administrative and Outsourcing Solutions. B2B Administrative and Outsourcing Solutions, advertising services customized for C. Had for her had not been very deep. Of course, they weren't deep, she chided herself. That was why he had been able to distance himself from her so quickly after the accident. Jason thought about Grace's words. She amused him, thinking that he would date someone and participate in some quaint little relationship. Dating, to him, that sounded like something children did. In this life, he would probably never fall in love with any woman. Even marriage would just be a means of furthering his business. When the two of them had finished eating, Jason got up to pay the bill. Grace was about to get up as well. However, her gaze passed through the restaurant's window and she suddenly saw a few familiar figures walking toward the restaurant. She turned around subconsciously as if she didn't want the people to see her. Then, the people really walked into the restaurant. They were led by a waiter as they walked in her direction. Jason watched her as he returned to the table. Her eyes darted about nervously. Sis, what's the matter? He asked her. Grace met his gaze for a brief second and then barreled into his body. He didn't think twice and just wrapped his arms around her as she slung her arms around his waist and buried her head in his chest. Jason was slightly stunned. However, he did not say anything. Instead, he allowed her to hug him like that. After a long while, he asked again, Grace. Grace raised her head slightly and looked to her side. Then, she heaved a sigh of relief. She looked up at Jason and said, have you paid the bill? I have. Then let's go, she said, picking up her bag and walking out of the restaurant with him as if she was running away from something. What's wrong? Are you hiding from something? He asked. Her footsteps paused, and an obscure look flashed across her face. My former colleagues came here to eat too. I don't want them to see me, she said with a self-deprecating smile. It's ridiculous, isn't it? In fact, they all know what I've been through and they probably can guess how miserable I must be right now, but I still don't want to see them face to face. She didn't want to see the sympathy in their eyes. She didn't want to see their pity or their disgust. She'd embarrassed her firm too when everything transpired in the wake of the accident. The news had been quick to report not just her name, but the law firm she worked for too. It was a juicy bit of news to say that the top attorney now needed one of her own. In the past, being a lawyer was something she had wanted to devote her entire life to. But now, although her colleagues were still doing that job, it was no longer a profession she could ever hope to practice again. Her self-deprecating look at the moment made a sudden pain shoot through his heart. He held her hand tighter and said in a low voice, then let's avoid them. One day in the future, you will shine more beautifully than anyone else. Ads by Pub Future. Shine. She gave a bitter smile. Now, she didn't want to think about any of that. Just living on was difficult enough. I heard from Lily that you wanted to help Grace Cummins find a job. I'm warning you, don't get yourself involved in that woman's affairs again. Back then, she killed Lily's sister, who was also Jason's fiancée. Our Stevens family cannot afford to offend Jason. His father's warning came from the other end of the phone, and Sean frowned slightly and replied, I understand. Our family cannot afford to offend Jason Reed, his father emphasized again. It all came down to money and business with his dad. To hell with anyone's happiness. Sean had heard these words too many times. Back then, everyone had been asking him why he would date someone like Grace in the first place. Fortunately, later, after breaking up with her, he started going out with Lily. His family was naturally satisfied with this development. The Atkinson family and the Stevens family were well matched. Way back then, the Atkinson family and the Reed family had almost been tied together through marriage, and although it hadn't worked out in the end, they still had dealings with each other. The Stevens family also hoped that if something were to happen, the Atkinson family would be able to speak up for them in front of Jason Reed. Family dynamics and honor were vital in their world. Businesses thrived or were decimated based on the relationships they Tainmark LLC, affiliate marketing for your business. Digital marketing strategies, affiliate solutions, online advertising and social media. Maintained with the other wealthy families in the region. After the call, Sean looked at the red light at the intersection in front of him and slowly stepped on the brake. Grace's face flashed in his mind. It was undeniable that the current Grace was very different from the woman he'd known in the past. Although her face was still the same, her temperament had changed. In particular, when he saw her wearing the clothes of a sanitation worker, it made him feel like the breakup was a completely correct decision. Grace was poor and broken, an embarrassment to herself. Lily was the woman who was the most suitable for him. As for Grace, she was just a memory. If she was mentioned by others in the future, he supposed she might even be a stain in his past. However, he felt a little guilty about how things had ended up. After all, when she hoped that he could help collect evidence for her that year, he had refused and had even broken up with her. Some might see it as heartless. He'd had a few pangs of guilt over it. But really, who had told her to crash into Jennifer Atkinson, of all people? She had managed to offend both the Atkinson family and the Reed family at the same time. It had been impossible for him to help her. As he was thinking about it, Sean's eyes looked through the windshield and he saw a slender figure across the intersection. That was Grace. Sean was stunned. At this moment, there was another man standing by Grace's side. The two of them seemed to be talking about something. Then, Grace slightly raised her chin while the man's head lowered and approached her face. The two of them looked like they were about to kiss. Sean couldn't help feeling angry. He hadn't been expecting Grace to find a man so soon after being released from prison. He felt like his reaching out to help her was all in vain. The red light turned green. Sean was about to start the car again, but his body suddenly stiffened. His figure, the figure of the man who was called the most important person in the city, appeared in his mind. This man's figure looked very much like Jason Reed. However, that was impossible. How could Jason possibly be by Grace's side? What a joke. The driver in the car behind Sean's honked his horn at him, and Sean started his car quickly. But at this moment, the man standing beside Grace looked up in the direction of his vehicle. When the man turned his head and looked over, Sean felt all the blood in his body freeze. Jason. Was it really Jason? Even if his current outfit and hairstyle were different from Sean's impression of him, that face looked really like Jason Reed's. Sean's body stiffened as he drove through the light. He debated pulling over or turning around. Every cell in his body wanted him. Ads by Pub Future. 2. Whip a U-turn and go back for a second look. He rubbed his eyes, thinking that everything had become surreal. Meanwhile, at the intersection, Grace was rubbing her eyes. Finally, it seemed that whatever was tickling her vision, an eyelash or bit of dust maybe, was gone. Jason's blowing had been quite effective. She glanced at him and blinked a few times. That's good, thank you, but Jason's attention was elsewhere. He was staring angrily at the other side of the intersection. Jay, what are you looking at? Grace asked. It's nothing. It's just that I seem to have seen a familiar face. Just now, Jason said faintly. Was he your friend? No, he and I aren't friends, he said, and that angry look flashed across his eyes. Again, Sean didn't sleep well all night as the scene he saw at the intersection the day before kept replaying in his mind. Surely, he had been mistaken, or perhaps the person standing beside Grace was someone who looked similar to Jason. Of course, that was it. Wasn't it said that everyone had a Atlantis consultancy, independent marketing agency, doppelganger out there somewhere? After all, how could a man like Jason, who was so high and mighty, be with Grace? Furthermore, Grace was the person who had killed Jason's fiancée. So in what world would Jason Reed ever find himself with the woman who murdered his true love? No one would have believed him even if he were to say this out loud. However, there was still uneasiness in his heart. What if it was true? What if that man really was Jason? He didn't even dare to continue imagining. The next day, Sean came to the street, which Grace was cleaning. He parked his car, got out and approached her. He had to know for sure. Are you with any man right now? Sean asked politely. Well, his tone was polite, but his question was quite pointed. Grace was stunned. She hadn't expected Sean to appear in front of her early in the morning and ask her such a question. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with you, Mr. Stevens, she said. I'm working right now, please get out of the way. She continued to clean the road as if he was invisible. Sean's expression turned cold. Who did she think she was, to ignore him? He grabbed Grace's hand and said, I'm not joking with you. Who was the man with you yesterday? Grace frowned. Was Sean asking about Jay? Regardless of why, or how he'd seen her, she didn't owe this man an answer. She didn't owe him anything. Mr. Stevens, why are you meddling with other people's business? Do I have to report to you whenever I am with my little brother? Little brother? Since when do you have a little brother? Sean asked. He only knew that she had a younger sister. Grace didn't intend to reveal too much. But she knew Sean. He was like a lion with its prey. He wouldn't relent. I took him in as my younger brother, can't I do that? She asked. Sean stared at Grace as if he wanted to check whether she was lying from her expression. At this moment, Claire, who was sweeping the floor on the other side of the road, saw the commotion and ran over. Mr. Stevens, please calm down. Don't use violence. Claire recognized that Sean was the person who had accompanied Lily when she had apologized at the sanitation service center. According to the workers there, Sean was Grace's ex-boyfriend. Mr. Stevens, if you don't let go, aren't you afraid that someone will take a photo of you? If that happens, you will have to explain yourself to Miss Atkinson, Grace said. Sean's face changed. In the end, he let go of her hand and left. Claire looked at Grace worriedly and said, why did that person ads by Pub Future come to find you? Who knows what he was going to do? I'm all right, Grace said. She didn't think that the reason Sean had asked which man she was with was that he still had feelings for her. However, it was indeed very abnormal. God knows what Sean was thinking. Goodness, couldn't she be left alone? She realized she might need to leave the city, the country, entirely if she wanted any rest. By the way, Claire said, she glanced away as though not wanting to look Grace in the eyes for what she had to say next. You should go to the director and ask for mercy when you take a break at noon. I heard that Farah Steele has been collecting signatures to make the director fire you. Claire winced as she relayed the bad news she had heard. Grace frowned. It seemed that Farah was sparing no efforts to punish her, but if the director really wants to dismiss me, asking him will be useless. If things don't work out in the end, then I will find another job. What other choice did she have? Maybe it would be better, anyway. Then Chase would have peace and she could do something else. But she felt helpless when she said that. After all, she had been working so hard at this job, and it would not be easy for her to find another. Claire also sighed. Between the two of them, they knew if Farah made a big deal of things, there would be no helping Grace. Farah was in management. Grace was only an hourly employee and one that could be hired or fired without any consequence. It was easy to know what the director would choose. After they finished their work, they met Farah at the sanitation service center. Farah looked at Grace with a smug face. I think you'd better get ready to leave soon. We don't want to work with a criminal. Grace looked calm, not showing the fear that Farah wanted to see. Chapter 59. Farah was unhappy with Grace's lack of reaction and said, act tough all you want. The director will call you into the office later. She snorted coldly. It had not been easy for her to collect the signatures in the office. When she gave the signatures to the director, it seemed that he would probably fire Grace. However, a moment later, a staff member from Human Resources called. Farah, the director wants you to see him in his office. He's asking for me. Farah was a little surprised. She'd been very explicit in her presentation, even going so far as to dig up the trial information on the internet and the salacious news articles that pointed to Grace driving while under the influence. Farah went to the director's office. Claire's face reflected her worry. Okay, when you meet the director later, tell him about your difficult position. Maybe the director will sympathize with you and won't fire you. We'll see, Grace replied. Some of her colleagues looked at her with sympathy, others with disgust. There were all kinds of gazes. However, no one had expected that when Farah came out of the director's office, she would be looking like she had lost her soul and all of her previous satisfaction. Farah, why did the director ask for you? The colleagues gathered around Farah Steele and asked. Farah wanted to cry, but she had no tears at this moment. She felt like she was in a dream. How was this possible? She had been fired. Why her? Wasn't Grace supposed to be the one getting fired? However, what the director had said after calling her into the office was still ringing in her ears. Farah Steele, I don't want anyone to be hostile to my colleagues like this. And what you've done by rallying other co-workers to isolate and bully another employee, it is harassment. What? Grace indeed served time in jail, but she has paid her price to society, as deemed by our judicial system and the judges and juries upholding it. You do not have the right to continue to judge her or to invade her privacy by airing her past for others, with the expressed intent of it causing unrest in the workplace. Farah paled. Furthermore, the director said, it doesn't mean that we should look at her with different eyes and not give her a chance to live. Since you feel that you can't work with Grace Cummins, I think you should quit your job now. She was an established member of the staff. She was being dismissed just like that. Farah couldn't believe it. She'd done nothing wrong. She told the truth. Farah, say something, the voice next to her urged. Farah looked around. When she saw Grace, she suddenly felt a rush of resentment. She stepped forward and said to Grace, it's you. It's all your fault. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been dismissed by the director. You should be the one who is made to ads by Pub Future leave. Everyone was shocked. The person who was being dismissed was Farah. Farah, are you kidding? How is this possible? Farah glared at Grace, making no effort to hide her resentment. She drew back her hand to slap Grace and her arm was caught. Grace ducked instinctively. She was no stranger to violence. But that didn't mean she had to stand there and absorb it. Just stop already. The director wants you to go. What does it have to do with Grace? Can Grace control the director's decision? Grace raised her head and saw that it was Chase. When the other people in the fleet saw this, they also went forward and shook their heads at Farah or dispersed so as not to get caught up in the drama surrounding her. The farce ended just like that. Farah stalked off. Grace stared at her as she left. Thank you, Grace said to Chase. It was nothing. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have been targeted by Farah in the first place, Chase said with embarrassment. Just as Grace was about to turn around and leave, Chase